Rights? It's almost impossible to describe how bad an idea that is. Responsibility. That's what gives life meaning.
How we doing? My name is Vish.
And I'm Nina.
And today, we'll be reacting to Jordan Peterson's video on
the simple reason 90% of men are lost in life.
Let's get into it.
Well, I'll tell you a couple of strange things that I don't really understand. The first is, when we've done the analysis of the effects of the future authoring program, it has had a differential impact on men, and it's had a particularly differential impact on excluded men. And so that would be non-Western ethnic minority men, majority men who aren't doing very well. So for example, at Mohawk College, the future authoring program had a particularly robust effect on Mohawk College students who were men who hadn't done very well in high school and who hadn't picked a major that had a career destination at its end. So you can imagine those people they have an ambiguous relationship with the idea of education, and they're not oriented specifically towards a goal. They're not very motivated. Now, why did it have a differential effect on men? That's a good question. Well, first of all, the women are doing better. So it might just be a matter of the fact that it does better for people who aren't doing as well, and at the moment, most of them are men. I think that might be part of it, but I don't believe that's all of it. I think that part of the reason that women are doing better is because they're agreeable. And so if a system sets out a structure and says, here's a pathway to attainment, the women won't rebel against that, they'll go along with it. And that's working very well for them at the moment. The men, especially the men on the disagreeable end of the distribution, and there's way more men on the disagreeable end of the distribution than there are women, right? That's what you get from, if you look at overlapping normal distributions. So there's the female distribution for agreeableness, male distribution for agreeableness. Tremendous overlap. Okay, women are higher. All the really agreeable people are women. All the really disagreeable people are men. And maybe the real differences occur at the extremes, right? So, and it's a very interesting side effect of overlapping distribution. People can be mostly the same, but that can still produce radical differences. Disagreeable men won't do anything they don't want to do. They just say, up yours. I'll go home and play video games. And I'm not listening to your stupid classes. And why should I work for you? I'll just go have fun. I'll do my own thing. I don't think they're motivated. And so then if you take the men who are like that and you say, okay, what do you want? You can have what you want, but you have to figure out what it is. So then they write down what they want and they think, oh, hey, well, that might be worth having, so maybe I'll put some effort into it. That's what it looks like to me. Now, that's weak evidence, and this is a weak argument, but I'm trying to stretch out my understanding to account for this. But I'll tell you something else that's really weird. I don't understand this either. More than 90% of the people who watch my videos on YouTube are men. Now that's weird because about 80% of psychology students are women. So that is not what you would expect, right? You would expect that the majority of them would be women. And you might say, well, it's because of the political stance I've taken. And I thought, well, that's possible. So I went and looked at the demographic data because I have that. Well, before I did any of the political videos, 85% of my viewers were men. So it's actually increased a bit. It's increased by 6%. And that's not trivial, but it was still overwhelmingly men. So that was interesting. I thought, what the hell? Why is that exactly? And then now I've been watching crowds when I've been talking to them. And the crowds that have come to see me in person. This happened at the University of Toronto free speech debate. And I actually noticed it and commented on it before the debate took place because I was talking about intrinsic differences between men and women. And I looked around the room and I thought, hey, 80% of the people in this room are men. So I had all the women stand up and then all the men stand up. I said, look, here's a natural experiment. For some reason, 80% of the people who showed up to this are men. Now everybody thought I was kind of cracked to do that. And it was a risk, but I thought, no, there's something going on here. And then what's interesting now is that every public appearance that I've made that's related to the sort of topics that we're discussing is overwhelmingly men. It's like 85 to 90%. And so I thought, wow, that's weird. What the hell's going on here exactly? And then the other thing I've noticed is that I've been talking a lot to the crowds that I've been talking to, not about rights, but about responsibility, right? What are you doing? You can't have the conversation about rights without the conversation about responsibility because your rights are my responsibility. That's what they are, technically. So you just can't have only half of that discussion. And we're only having half that discussion. And the question is, well, what the hell are you leaving out if you only have that half of the discussion? And the answer is, well, you're leaving out responsibility. And then the question is, well, what are you leaving out if you're leaving out responsibility? And the answer might be, well, maybe you're leaving out the meaning of life. That's what it looks like to me. It's like, here you are, suffering away. What makes it worthwhile? Rights? It's almost impossible to describe how bad an idea that is. Responsibility. That's what gives life meaning. It's like lift a load. Then you can tolerate yourself, right? Because look at you, you're useless, easily hurt, easily killed. Why should you have any self-respect? That's the story of the fall. Pick something up and carry it. Make it heavy enough so that you can think, yeah, well, useless as I am, at least I could move that from there to there. Well, what's really cool about that is that when I talk to these crowds about this, the men's eyes light up. And that's like I've seen that phenomenon because I've been talking about this mythological material for a long time. And I can see when I'm watching crowds, people, their eyebrows lift, their eyes light up because I put something together for them. And that's what mythological stories do. So I'm not taking responsibility for that. That's what the stories do. So I say the story and people go click, 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 and their eyes light up. But this responsibility thing, that's a whole new order of this, is that young men are so hungry for that, it is unbelievable. And one of the things I've been talking to some of the people who've been running for the Conservative leadership in Canada, and I've been talking to them about, well, the difficulties they have communicating with young people, because Conservatives, what the hell are they going to sell to young people, right? Because being Conservative is something that happens when you're older. They can sell responsibility. No one's selling it. And the thing is, for men, there's nothing but responsibility. I was watching The Simpsons the other day. I watched the first Simpsons episode, and I deconstructed it. And so it's really interesting. So what happens in the first Simpson episode is that it's Christmas, and Homer and Marge are going to buy some Christmas presents, but Homer doesn't get his Christmas bonus. And so he's absolutely crushed by that. And that actually is a recurring theme in The Simpsons, where Homer loses his job or something like that, or can't make enough money. He's completely crushed. Even though he's kind of useless, bumbling, laughing fool of a guy, the thing that gives that show its soul is that he's still oriented towards his family. That's what makes him honorable, is that foolish as he is, he's decided to adopt responsibility for his family and to try to bear that. He's a holy fool. He's not a complete fool. And it's so interesting watching the story because he suffers dreadfully as a consequence of not being able to fulfill his responsibility. Well, that's for men. Women have their sets of responsibilities. They're not the same because they're complicated, because women, of course, have to take primary responsibility for having infants at least, but then also for caring for them. They're structured differently than men for biological necessity, even if it's not a psychological issue, and it's also partly a psychological issue. Women know what they have to do. Men have to figure out what they have to do. And if they have nothing worth living for, then they stay Peter Pan. And why the hell not? Because the alternative to valued responsibility is impulsive, low-class pleasure. And you saw that in the Pinocchio story, right? That's Pleasure Island. Why lift a load if there's nothing in it for you? That's another thing that we're doing to men that's a very bad idea, and to boys. You're pathological and oppressive. Fine then, why the hell am I going to play? If that's the situation, if I get no credit for bearing responsibility, you can bloody well be sure I'm not going to bear any. But then, your life is useless and meaningless, and you're full of self-contempt.
Anxiety is something I used to really struggle with.
Me too. I used to have panic attacks, racing thoughts, and pretty much everything in between.
Yeah, I had very similar symptoms. I'm really glad that you're here today because we came up with a course called Anxiety Unplugged.
We know how when you're in the midst of anxiety, there can be so many resources, so many places you look for relief, for help. And we came up with a super simple 3-step process so that you can get everything you need in one place without having to frantically search the internet for resources, only to end up with more anxiety.
To check out the Anxiety Unplugged course, click the link in the description.
Denialism, and that's not good. That's what I think's going on at a deeper level with regards to men needing this direction. A man has to decide that he's going to do something. He has to decide that. Yeah, well, partly what you're trying to do in the future authoring process is say, okay, well, what's your highest value? Right? It's the star. What are you aiming for? You can decide, man. But there's some criteria. It should be good for you. It should be good for you in a way that facilitates your moving forward. Maybe it should be good for you in a way that's also good for the family and the community. It should cover the domain of life. I mean, there's constraints on what you should regard as a value. But within those constraints, you have the choice. You have choice. Well, the thing is that people will carry a heavy load if they get to pick the goddamn load. And they think, well, I won't carry any load. It's like, okay, fine, but then you're like the sled dog that doesn't have a sled to pull. You're just gonna tear pieces out of your own legs because you're bored. People are pack animals. They need to pull against a weight. And that's not true for everyone. It's not true particularly, say, for low conscientious people. I mean, maybe they're open and creative or extroverted and some other things. But for the typical person, they'll eat themselves up unless they have a load. This is why there's such an opiate epidemic among dispossessed, white, middle-aged guys who are unemployed in the US. It's like they lose their job, they're done. They despise themselves. They develop chronic pain syndromes and depression. And the chronic pain is treated with opiates. It's like, that's what we're doing. That's what it looks like to me. And it's so interesting to watch the young men when you talk to them about responsibility. They're so goddamn thrilled about it. It just blows me away. It's like, really? That's the counterculture. grow the hell up and do something useful. Really, I could do that? Oh, I'm so excited by that idea. No one ever mentioned that before. It's like rights, 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 rights. It's appalling. And I feel that that's deeply felt by the people who are coming out to listen to these sorts of things too. They've had enough of that. And they better have, because it's a non-productive mode of being. Responsibility, man. That's where the meaning in life is.
So, what'd you think?
I didn't know where he was going at first, but as he kept talking, I actually thought it was kind of beautiful. Like that, taking on responsibility and how that can create so much movement for people. Like it can get them, it can pull them out of that state of feeling frozen, unsure what to do, if it's depression, if it's anxiety, and actually pull them towards something that makes them feel like they want to keep going, like they want to keep moving, they want to keep learning, growing, whatever it is, and to actually create something. And whether that's, you know, like you working for somebody else, whether it's you starting your own business, whether it's whatever that is for that man, I think it's beautiful for him to even make that observation that it can light people up. And I think for the right person in the right time of life, that's so important. Tell me, I'm so curious what you think.
Yeah, for the masses, I definitely agree, right? I love what he pointed out. So in the beginning too, I was also a little confused as to where he was going. And then I think I got most of the point at the end. But the observation that he made, which was that men have their purpose so tied to responsibility, is so true. Most men have that tied together. And especially if you look at most, even dads, most middle-aged men, once they retire, they're getting close to that point of retirement, they start to get hit with that midlife crisis because they start to realize that their job is not their whole life. They start, you know, now going a little crazy. And I'm not sure if you can relate, but we both know, whether it's our dads or other people's dads, they definitely can approach that sort of phase of life, right? Just because of how tied their purpose is to their responsibility. It's not that responsibility is a bad thing. It's not that purpose is a bad thing. But honestly, identifying yourself so much with either of those two things, I don't know if that's the most sustainable way to go. Like, I agree with what he's saying in terms of the problem that most men, in this specific case, are falling down this downward spiral because they're losing their responsibility or their sense of responsibility, which in turn makes them lose their sense of purpose. But I don't know if the solution is to get more responsibility.
What do you think a better solution would be?
Great question. I mean, I would say immediately for most people, it's not a bad solution. I could definitely see it being a very temporary solution. But going back to even what you said with anxiety, depression, and then all these things, you know, sort of going away once people find their purpose and their work or their responsibility, it can honestly just cover up those deeper issues that are happening within themselves. And sure, going to work can act as some sort of outlet, but I wonder if it's outlet or I wonder if it's covering up what you're actually dealing with internally. So to me, I feel like actually facing those feelings firsthand, actually seeing what they are and then overcoming it more directly instead of just pushing it aside. I mean, sure, technically if you gave yourself responsibility and work your whole life, till your last breath, you could, you know, be somewhat content with life. But I almost feel like it's a false sense of comfort.
I actually like that. So do you think that having that sense of responsibility, finding that sense of responsibility actually dissolves any of those things, or do you think it does just cover it up? Any of those underlying feelings, whatever they may be. It's so vague.
So I would say at the end, whatever you do, whether you do things or you don't do things, whether you do work or you don't do work, whether you're lazy or not lazy, it's not about what you're doing. It's about how you're doing what you're doing. And so if your awareness or your consciousness is able to deepen with the work, where you're actually going to work, giving your all to what you're doing, and making that itself a meditation, for instance, right? Whether it's even working at McDonald's, working at Home Depot, whatever it might be. Doesn't matter what your job is, being a doctor. If you can truly give your all and basically surrender yourself to that actual work, then yes, I think that's definitely a way to go. But then what I will say is this, right? If these people are going to work, but not really giving their all, and they're just distracting themselves, then I think they're just digging themselves into a deeper hole with their actual issues. What do you think about that?
So it sounds like what you're saying is that what Jordan Peterson is saying is that maybe if you're not in the best mental state, or maybe you're looking at your life and you're not satisfied with your life and you wish it looked differently, maybe what Jordan Peterson's saying could get you from here to here.
Yes.
But you're saying that maybe it can only get you here, but it can't get you here.
Exactly. No,
So, like,
I love that. Yeah.
It can pull you up, but it can't get you to, what would you call it? What would you call this up here?
Let's call it true fulfillment. True fulfillment. Because you might think you're getting fulfilled because now you're from here to here, but you can go way deeper. I mean, you should technically invert what I'm describing, but if you did invert that, it's exactly what you're saying. There's a ceiling, right? There's a certain ceiling that just distracting yourself with work and responsibility will get you. But I also like what you're saying, because for people that are at that super low, point, it might be really hard for them to just give their all to whatever, meditate and then do yoga and get enlightened.
Yeah, like it all happens in baby steps, right? Because maybe when you're here, whatever that really means, being here, maybe you're not able to fully see what it even means to be up here.
Yeah.
Again, whatever that really means. But if you can get from here to here first, then you're able to access so much more within yourself, and you're able to see so much more that sometimes you have to go here first to get there. And maybe what he's saying, maybe what Jordan Peterson's saying, actually can, get you progressively to a more
higher state, deeper state.
Yeah.
So I will say we should also be careful with completely neglecting responsibility, because I feel like for someone that, let's just say, never took on responsibility in their life, whether you're a man or a woman, doesn't matter, you feeling like responsibility is not the way to go, and then you just doing nothing with no awareness is like the worst thing you can do, right? So it's not just ignore responsibility. At least I feel like someone that's tried responsibility, right, where you actually have taken on leading a family or taking care of the house or a job, whatever it might be, I almost feel like it's more for people that have actually at least tried the responsibility route. And once they've realized, wait, even though I'm taking on this responsibility and I'm not really that fulfilled or that content or that happy or whatever term you're gonna call it, then there's a next better stepping stone to where that person can be like, okay, I guess this isn't it. Let me dig deeper. So we should just be careful, right? With just altogether ignoring responsibility and saying that we shouldn't do anything. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it kind of goes back to what you were saying before of it's not just what you're doing, but how you're doing it. Because if you're not making purpose the thing that keeps you going, but you're doing that with a high level of awareness, versus if you're not doing it because there's a lot of avoidance and inner conflict, you're gonna have two completely different manifestations of you in your life.
If you have any other reaction video requests,
Comment down below.
We would love to check those out. Thank you so much for watching the video with us.
See you soon.